The desert night breathed dust and silence, the kind that pressed against the lungs and turned every sound into an echo. A lone rider staggered through it, his horse long lost, his boots heavy with blood and sand. The man's broad shoulders sagged beneath the torn hide of his coat, each step a defiance against the darkness that stalked him. His revolver hung limp at his side, nearly useless now, chambers dry. The desert had taken more than his strength. It had stolen his hope, though pride kept him moving. He collapsed beneath the twisted arms of a mesquite tree, its roots clutching the earth like bones too stubborn to decay. The stars above looked sharp enough to cut. He pressed his palm to his side, where blood had soaked through the fabric. He thought of graves, one in particular, marked by a crooked wooden cross on the edge of a lonely prairie. A brother buried with no hymn, no preacher, only wind to carry the sorrow. He closed his eyes, ready to let the desert claim him. Then, faintly came a sound. It was not the cry of a coyote or the whistle of night wind through stone. It was human, fragile, almost drowned by the stillness. A whisper, breaking desperate. "Don't leave me here." His eyes opened. Just beyond the mesquite, a figure crawled through the dust, one arm dragging uselessly, the other clawing full with nails split and bleeding. The moonlight revealed her face, a young Apache woman, cheeks streaked with dirt and blood, hair matted, eyes swollen with tears. She looked as though fire had chased her across the earth. Her ankle twisted at an angle no foot should bear, and across her shoulder ran a raw gash that glistened when the pale light. She lifted her face to him, voice trembling. "I ain't strong, cowboy, but I can care for you." The words cracked, heavy with pain and pleading, as though every ounce of her was poured into them. Then she collapsed against the sand, chest rising shallow and uneven. The cowboy's instincts urged him to ignore her. Strangers in the desert often brought trouble, and he had borne enough of it for one lifetime. Yet something in her voice, that raw confession, rooted him. It was not strength she offered, nor protection, only the promise of care, fragile and human. Perhaps that was what he had been missing most. With a groan, he pushed himself upright and staggered toward her. His boots scuffed against the stones, his breath ragged as though each step scraped his ribs. He knelt beside her, the scent of iron and smoke clinging to her skin. Her pulse fluttered beneath his fingers, weak but alive. He considered leaving her. Yet the desert had taken too much already. He would not let it take another soul without a fight. "Can you stand?" he rasped. Her lips trembled. She shook her head. He gritted his teeth, slid his arms beneath her, and lifted her against his chest. Her body was feather-light, but hot with fever. She whimpered softly as her injured ankle brushed his thigh. He carried her through the dark, each step agony, until he spotted the outline of a ruined barn slumped near the dry riverbed, its roof sagging like a broken spine. Shelter was better than nothing. Inside, the air was thick with dust and rot. Old hay lay scattered like forgotten memories, and a beam of moonlight cut through a hole in the roof, illuminating motes that swirled with every movement. He lowered her gently onto the hay, wincing as his own sighed toward pain. His coat fell heavy around his shoulders, but he stripped it off, laying across her. Her eyes fluttered open again, searching his face as though uncertain if he were real. "Why, help me," she whispered. He didn't answer at first. He found a rag among the shadows, dipped in the canteen he carried, and pressed it to her wound. She hissed, but did not flinch away. He bound her shoulder with strips torn from his shirt, his rough hands trembling with exhaustion. Finally he muttered, "'Cause I couldn't stand to hear you die." For a long time, only the sound of his breathing and her shallow gasps filled the barn. Outside, coyotes howled, their cries long and sharp, rolling across the desert like a dirge. She drifted toward unconsciousness, but her fingers, small and trembling, sought his wrist. She held it lightly, as though needing to anchor herself to something solid in a world determined to erase her. When dawn came, the barn smelled of old hay and smoke from the small fire he had coaxed into life. Dust motes danced in shafts of gold light breaking through the roof. He had not slept, his revolver balanced across his knees as he kept watch. She stirred, whispering something in her own tongue before switching to broken English. "They'll come," she said, eyes half closed. "The ones who burned my home. They don't stop." He studied her face, the bruises along her cheek, the cracked lips. He thought of the fresh tracks he had seen the night before. Hoof prints pressed deep into the sand, circling like wolves. He said nothing, but his hand rested on the revolver, fingers curling tighter. Later, when her fever eased slightly, she tried to rise. He steadied her with a hand beneath her arm. Her ankle buckled, sending a sharp cry through the barn. He caught her before she hit the floor, pulling her against his chest. She clung there, trembling, breath against his neck. "You can't walk," he said. Her eyes burned. "Then leave me. You got no reason to." "I ain't leaving." His voice was flat, final. Something in her broke then, not in weakness, but in the way walls collapse when they've been standing too long. She turned her face against his shirt, and for the first time, she let herself cry. The days stretched long. Heat pressed against the barn walls until the air shimmered. He guided her to sip water from his canteen, coaxed her to eat what little jerky remained. She, in turn, reached for his shoulder where the bullet graze had hardened into a crusted wound. With trembling fingers, she unwound the dirty cloth and pressed fresh bandages, wincing as he did. Their roles shifted with each breath, sometimes protector, sometimes the one needing care. Night fell heavy again. The wind carried whispers through the cracks in the barn walls, and the moon climbed high. They sat close by the fire, silence stretched between them like taut wire. At last he spoke. "What's your name?" She looked at him through the flicker of flame. "Names are for the living. You're still breathing." Her lips curved, though it wasn't a smile. "Then call me whatever you want, Cowboy. Maybe I won't be here tomorrow." He didn't argue. He only nodded, gaze fixed on the fire as if afraid to look at her too long. She fell asleep first, head against his arm. Her breath was shallow, but steady now, no longer gasping as before. He stayed awake, staring through the cracks at the desert beyond. Shadows moved. Coyotes or men, he couldn't be sure. At dawn, he crept outside. The sand was cool beneath his boots, the horizon bleeding orange and purple. He knelt near the riverbed, dry and cracked, and there, half-hidden, lay the sign he feared. Hoof prints, fresh, not one horse, but several. Circling, his jaw tightened. Trouble wasn't just near, it was closing. When he returned, she was awake, eyes wary. She saw the tension in his face before he spoke. "They're coming," he said. She nodded, as if she had known it all along. By midday, they were on the move again. He fashioned a crude brace for her ankle from wood and cloth, then lifted her onto the saddle of a horse he'd found grazing near the barn, his old mount, somehow returned. She clung to him as they rode through the burning heat, her breath warm against his back. The desert opened wide, endless plains of golden sand, broken only by jagged cliffs that rose like teeth. Buzzards wheeled high above, patient and cruel. The sun scorched their skin, turned their throats dry. Yet together they pressed on, bound not by choice but necessity. They reached the cliffs by late afternoon. The air grew still, heavy with the scent of dust and stone. That was when the first shot rang out. It cracked against the rocks near his head, showering him with fragments. The horse reared, and he pulled her tight against him to keep her from falling. Another shot echoed, and voices hooped in the distance. Shadows moved along the ridge above, men with rifles, hunting them. He spurred the horse into a narrow pass, bullets sparking against stone. The echoes rolled like thunder, deafening. She clung to him, eyes wide with terror, her breath ragged in his ear. Then the pass ended abruptly at a cliff. Below lay the river gorge, its waters shallow but rushing, the only path forward. Behind them, hoofbeats thundered closer. He looked at her once, their eyes locking in a silent question. She nodded, though fear shimmered in her gaze. He drove the horse over the edge. The world turned to chaos, air screaming, water rising, bodies crashing. They hit hard, the river tearing them apart before dragging them downstream. Rocks scraped, current roared, and darkness swallowed all sound but the rush of water and the pounding of his own heart. And when he clawed his way to the surface, gasping, she was nowhere to be seen. The river tore at him like claws, dragging him into currents that spun and slammed his body against hidden rocks. His chest burned, lungs screaming for air, but his mind did not fear death for himself. It feared it for her. Somewhere in the rush of foam and shadow, she had vanished. He fought the current, arms aching, ears filled with the roar that devoured every sound. When at last he broke the surface again, coughing, spitting blood and river water, he caught sight of her. She was clinging to a fallen log wedged between two boulders, her hair plastered across her face, her lips parted in a weak gasp. He lunged toward her, nearly dragged under again by the swirl of the current. With a final burst of strength, he seized her arm, and together they were flung onto the muddy bank, coughing and shivering as the storm clouds above split the sky with light. They lay side by side for long moments, gasping. Rain began to fall, cold needles against their skin, washing away blood and dust. He turned his head toward her, saw her eyes blinking open, lashes clumped with water. She whispered his name, not spoken before, but somehow she had learned in the chaos, as though knowing it gave her the right to keep him alive. "We're not safe here," he said, pushing himself upright despite the agony in his ribs. He helped her sit, his arm steadying her trembling frame. They both looked toward the canyon rim, where silhouettes on horseback stood briefly outlined by lightning. The gang had followed. He pulled at her feet, ignoring the scream in his own bones. Together, limping, they followed the river downstream until the gorge narrowed into a cave mouth carved into the cliff. Inside, it smelled of damp stone and iron. Darkness wrapped around them, broken only by flashes of lightning from outside. She sank against the wall, shivering. Her ankle was swollen, skin stretched tight around it. He knelt beside her, tore strips of fabric from his shirt, and bound the joint tighter. She winced but did not cry out, her jaw clenched with silent defiance. When he finished, he brushed the wet hair back from her face. "You saved me," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, we saved each other." The storm howled outside, wind shrieking through the canyon like the voices of the dead. They huddled together in the shadows, sharing warmth, listening to the riders above search for them. Torches flickered along the rim, and the smell of smoke drifted down. He rested his revolver across his lap, fingers tracing the worn handle. One bullet left. It was not enough. When dawn returned, the storm had passed. The desert glistened, alive with the smell of wet earth. He led her out of the cave, his arm steady around her waist. They followed narrow deer trails through brush until they reached higher ground where the air felt cleaner, though danger pressed closer with every hour. The gang had not given up. They would never give up until blood was spilled. On a ridge, he paused, gazing across the plains. A small cluster of cottonwoods bent near a trickle of water. They could rest there. He helped her down, easing her onto the soft earth, then set about building a fire with damp wood. Smoke curled thin into the sky, fragile and gray. She watched him, her eyes steady despite exhaustion. "Why do they hunt you?" she asked at last. He hesitated, then sank beside her. His face was shadowed, worn by years of grief. "Once I rode with them. Thought I could make easy money. Thought vengeance for my brother meant blood. But I walked away after I saw what they did to family that never raised a hand against them. They don't forgive men who walk away." She nodded, as if she understood, without judgment. Then she spoke, voice breaking. "They burned my village, took everything. I don't know why I lived when the rest did not. Maybe to suffer longer." He turned toward her, saw the weight in her eyes, and shook his head. "No, you lived to fight, to remind the world it can't erase you." The fire crackled between them, sparks flying upward like prayers. For the first time, silence between them felt less like emptiness and more like trust. That night, as stars spilled across the sky, she pressed closer to him for warmth. Her head rested against his shoulder, her breath warm on his neck. He did not move away. He stared into the fire, thinking of the grave that haunted him, and for the first time in years, he felt something stir inside his chest that was not only pain. But peace was brief. At dawn, the hoofbeats came again. He woke to the sound of horses approaching, the metallic clink of spurs, the sharp laughter of men. They had found the trail. His heart pounded as he helped her to her feet, gripping her hand tightly. Together, they ran through the brush, stumbling across rocks, branches tearing at their clothes. Behind them, shouts rose and a rifle cracked, the bullet whining past. They reached the base of another cliff, sheer and jagged. There was no path upward, no cover. He pressed her against the stone, shielding her with his body. His revolver felt heavier than ever in his hand. The riders emerged, torches burning, guns drawn. Their leader rode forward, a scar carved across his face like lightning frozen in flesh. His grin was cruel, hungry. "Thought you could hide in the rocks forever, boy," the man sneered. His eyes slid toward the woman and his grin widened. "You picked up a pretty companion. Shame what happens to pretty things out here." The cowboy leveled his revolver, though he knew one bullet meant nothing against so many. The leader laughed, spreading his arms wide. "Go on, use it. Make it count." Before he could fire, the woman stepped forward, limping, her eyes fierce. She seized a burning branch in the ground and swung at the horses, sending them rearing and screaming. The sudden chaos scattered the riders, their formation broken. The cowboy used the moment, firing his last bullet into the leader's shoulder. The man roared, toppling for his horse. But the others surged forward, enraged. A storm of fists and boots crashed over the cowboy, dragging him to the ground. He fought like a beast, blood flying, bones cracking. The woman screamed his name, striking at the men with her burning branch, her body fragile but unyielding. In the madness, he seized a fallen rifle, its barrel slick with mud, and fired wildly. One man fell, then another. The rest hesitated, suddenly wary. Their leader, clutching his bleeding shoulder, snarled and staggered toward them. Lightning split the sky, the world bathed in white. The cowboy raised the rifle again, steady despite his wounds. The leader spat blood, sneering. "You'll die here, and so will she." The shot thundered. The leader crumpled, his body folding into the dust. Silence followed, broken only by rain beginning to fall once more. The remaining riders stared, eyes shifting. Then one by one, they turned their horses and fled into the storm. Fear scattered them more effectively than bullets ever could. The cowboy collapsed to his knees, the rifle falling from his hands. She stumbled to him, dropped beside him, and pressed her arms around his shoulders. They clung together in the rain, bodies trembling, hearts pounding. "You saved us," she whispered, voice shaking. He shook his head, resting his forehead against hers. "We saved each other. Always." The storm eased, leaving the world washed clean. They sat there as dawn broke, light spilling over the cliffs, painting the desert in gold and fire. For the first time, the silence between them was not filled with grief, but with something gentler, something almost like peace. He brushed his thumb across her cheek, wiping away rain and tears. She leaned into his touch, eyes closing. There were no grand declarations, no promises carved in stone. Only the quiet truth of two broken souls who had chosen to survive together. Later, as the fire burned low and the sun climbed higher, they built a small camp in the shelter of the rocks. He fashioned a lean-to, she tended the fire. Their hands brushed often, not by accident. Each touch was a vow unspoken. As night fell again, he spoke softly, almost as if to himself. "Maybe we've both been running too long. Maybe it's time to stop." She looked at him, eyes reflecting the firelight, and nodded. "Then we stop. Here. Together." The fire popped, sending sparks upward into the dark sky, where they vanished among the stars. And though danger still roamed the wide frontier, though scars and loss would never fully fade, they had found in each other a strength neither could claim alone. The desert no longer felt like a grave. It felt like the beginning of something worth living for. The night wind carried their silence, wrapping in the hush of the wilderness. And if you had been there, sitting by that fire, you might have felt it too, that fragile, stubborn spark of hope that survives even the cruelest storms. Because out here on the frontier, strength wasn't always a steady hand or a sharp bullet. Sometimes it was simply the promise whispered in the dark. "I ain't strong, but I can care for you.